The 2 August Planning Commission work session meeting to order. Could we get a roll call, please?
Chairman Loring.
Here.
Commissioner Tagnesi.
Here.
Commissioner Pfeiffer.
Here.
Commissioner Burnett.
Here.
Commissioner Mayfield. Here. Commissioner Ray.
Here.
Commissioner Richardson.
Here.
Welcome back. You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It feels like we haven't been here in months, and I guess we haven't. But unless there's a big list of things to do next summer, I would encourage the Planning Commission to kind of do the same, to take July off, provided the PAD and the City Council kind of follow that track and take the month off. Unless there's someone on the Planning Commission that would disagree with that. Seeing none, we're going to move on. In the regular meeting agenda, I would just ask you to take a look at the work session and regular meeting minutes from June. Review those so we can quickly go through those in the regular meeting. And let's just move right into SD-22-571, request of Peroni Associates for preliminary major subdivision approval of 35 lots at 520 North Pleasant Valley Road, zone medium density residential district with a planned unit development overlay. You're not Mr. Stewart.
I'm not Mr. Stewart, but he's out today, so you're stuck with me.
You're
on both the items here. So
there are worse things.
Hey, there's, I suppose. This is a project you're familiar with because you recently reviewed the rezoning request to create the 34-unit townhouse PUD. That, of course, did get approved by City Council. So the next step with the townhouse project is to go through the subdivision, and procedurally that requires that the Planning Commission only have a public hearing. City Council is not required to have a public hearing on subdivisions, but they do have to receive the final subdivision recommendation from the Commission. So your process here is a two-step one, which we normally handle in the same Planning Commission meeting. That is, you have a preliminary subdivision public hearing, and then you follow that up either at that same time or later in the agenda with a recommendation for the final subdivision. With these smaller ones like this, unless there are outstanding issues, typically the Commission will forward the final subdivision onto PED Committee and Council at the same meeting that you conduct the public hearing on the preliminary. So this is a preliminary, and the layout is unchanged from what you had seen with the rezoning request. It's just now we have a preliminary plat layout. You can see on the screen there the 34 lots plus the common lot, and then all of the roadway is proposed as public right-of-way. So that would be conveyed over to the city for perpetual maintenance and would meet the city standards in that regard. A little more detail on the site plan exhibit, which will come along and is being reviewed by staff at the same time this subdivision request is. They're very interrelated on a townhouse development. You can see the roadway improvements, the location of the proposed townhouses and driveways, and then some of the infrastructure, including the dark lines there represent some of the stormwater drainage. You may recall that some of the adjoining property owners were concerned about stormwater. We advised them that that would be detailed as part of the subdivision and the site plan, so we're now at that stage.
Is that a retention?
Yes.
Retention pond or ball field?
It is. Well, when it's dry out, it can serve as a ball field, but that is intended to be a detention, not retention. So it should not be a wet pond for very long. The storm drainage is picked up from the street, goes underneath the picnic pavilion into the pond, and then you can kind of see it comes back out toward North Pleasant Valley Road there in the upper right, and then makes a right turn to head toward the stormwater facilities that are in Friendship Park to the north. So the key here is that the water from this development is not spilling out across the backyards of the folks who live on Bruce Street, nor over on the other side is it necessarily going to impact any of the folks on the next street to the south or along the, I think it's Battle Avenue to the east there. So as was stated during the rezoning process, don't believe that there's any impact on adjoining property owners with regard to drainage. Landscape plan, because it's also a site plan, we have details. You can see the infill of evergreen trees that are proposed where there are not otherwise effective screening trees along the perimeter, and then new street trees that you can see there along the street. They also are proposing some evergreen screening along the Pleasant Valley Road frontage, and that will be interrupted necessarily because of the driveways that come out directly to Pleasant Valley Road for those 4 townhouse units, 2 in each of 2 structures there toward the top center of the screen, and the screening would be in between those. There is a homeowners association that's required here because these are platted lots for sale, but there would be common elements such as the open space, the screening and evergreen trees, the stormwater management facility, and the picnic shelter. And they have provided draft of that beginning on page 18 and continuing through a series of pages there, both the covenant restrictions as well as the HOA document there. And just to kind of refresh your memory, this is how the site used to look there on the top with the radio tower. It's now gone. The bottom image, the thing I want to emphasize there is that by putting in that storm sewer that I pointed out that heads up North Pleasant Valley Road toward the park, which is in the background of that photo there where you see the yellow arrow sign, the staff feels that because they are already going to be ripping up, disturbing that area, that they should do a sidewalk extension up to the corner. You can see a little bit of the sidewalk there in the lower right, stops just before that utility pole. We feel that the developer should provide a safe connection from this development to where a crosswalk would go up less than 200 feet to the north there, to the intersection with Bruce.
And is he doing that?
I'll let Mr. Maslowski answer that in a minute.
Thank you.
So, and that was a comment that David included, I think it was on page 12 of your packet, interesting, page 4 of 32 or page 12 of 131, whichever you want to refer to there. I think it's the second to last full paragraph there before the recommendation. So the last thing I'll note is that we don't have any plan for subphasing of this. And this was something that came up with the Brooks Manor townhouse development. They said, we don't want any phasing, and then sure enough, as they approached completion of some of the units, they said, well, we want to get people moved into these units, and we said, you didn't do any subphasing, so everything has to be done before any one unit is occupied. So just cautioning that, if that's likely to be the case here, they may want to identify where some of the units might be allowed to be occupied in advance of the others, and then clearly identify that the stormwater pond and picnic pavilion would nonetheless be completed with the first phase occupancies. So David's given you a favorable motion there to approve the preliminary subdivision and forward the final subdivision. The other one would be the other recommendation would be either to table it or for some reason recommend denial, but with subdivisions, it's what we call a ministerial act, so unless there's an identified deficiency, the applicant is pretty much entitled to an approval. Ron, do you have anything you want to add?
No, sir. Great. Questions for the staff? David? Sorry, John.
No,
John threw his hand up. John, go, please.
I'm just curious, we're back to two floors now, 2 stories, right?
Correct, yes.
Or we just do?
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Bigger footprints, but only 2-story instead of 3-story.
So the detention pond is just, or detention area, whatever.
Yeah, it's the
depression.
correct.
There.
Yeah. They have provided a grade. There's some grading shown on the plan here, but it's kind of hard to make out.
I can't do that on my.
Yeah, it's I don't know, Ron, do you know approximately how deep the stormwater facility is?
12 feet maybe.
12 feet? Okay.
Will it be fenced?
Probably not.
Not if, as long as they're not
It's a dry
retaining
pond,
water.
so, it fills up when it rains, and then, of course, they don't fill up that much.
Yeah.
But there's some water in it.
I'm just curious, is there a setback that pushes it next to the shelter, or could it get closer to the property line? Or what demands for it?
Ron, why don't you come up if you're going to respond to the question?
It's the, you don't see the grading, you don't see the grading on this plan, but we have to grade up from the existing property line to form a berm, and then it dips down, and then back up to the townhouse elevation.
So the water will stay in the middle?
So so the water stays there.
You good?
It looks good.
Right.
Two things. One, with the grading, so with the berm that's on each, that'd be what, the north and the northeast corner of that pond. So I know a couple of neighbors, I guess they had water in their backyards from storms, and it's potential runoff from this site. But so the grading from their yards does not go towards the stormwater detention pond, is that correct?
That's
That berm would,
All of this site drains off now to the east and to the east and the north, except for a very small piece that drains back toward Patterson.
And so the pond is, the drainage plan is going to prevent the water from going to the east?
Right, now there's a little bit in the rear, we're picking up all the roof area, we're picking up
Yeah.
everything we can, but there's a small portion of the backyards that'll continue to go there, but it'll be a significantly less area that drains there now.
and does the grade of the entire site fall to that corner?
No, some of it actually falls back toward
The street.
Pleasant Valley Road.
Okay. But in the back or in that area,
Yeah,
it does
it all
fall?
sort of wraps around, the storm sewer
Okay,
wraps.
so there's not gonna be, if any drainage towards the neighbors?
No, just
At all.
the small rear yards that we couldn't pick up
Okay.
with the storm. with
And
the
you're actually going to collect it around the neighborhood and drain it
Yes,
to there?
there's pipes behind all the houses
Yes,
for
okay.
roof drains.
And then, I didn't see any screen behind that stormwater management detention pond.
We do have screening all around the.
Yeah, there's the little blocks, but I can't identify what those.
Yeah, are those little blocks, is that screening, or is that something?
It's, okay, so right now there's wooded area and the adjoining neighbor said, look, we have mature landscaping back there, so if you can keep that, we can. And so as part of the rezoning, we said, we'll work with the city and say, okay, we're gonna plant Leland cypress here, but we're gonna leave these trees here, and that way we'll fill in all the voids.
But
So
is it-
we're showing that, representing that across that eastern property line and up
Okay.
the
I just-
south side.
I still want to have the neighbors go look through that stormwater management and see the house or, townhouses or anything. Not that they'll be able to see them over the Leland cypresses anyway for the first several years, but, try to make sure that screening is continuous
Yeah, it looks,
throughout the,
looks like there's some showing on this aerial view behind 613 and then 537 Battle, but right at 617, Bruce, it looks a little thin there. So.
right? And so there would be screening there on 617.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha. I just want to make sure they're covered.
Anything else, sir? John?
Are all the HOA documents that were required are here or will be reviewed by the attorney? I know I couldn't tell if that was already done or will be done.
So these are draft documents, and then before staff would sign off on it, particularly engineering department, they look at, because this is going to be public streets and some public storm sewer, they're going to look that over very closely and refer it to, I think, Mike, gosh, I can't remember, local attorney that works
Gotcha.
with the city.
But that'll just be one box to make sure to check before next time. that still needs to be done in between here now?
Yes.
Gotcha. That's all I had.
Is in 2 weeks, is that a public hearing?
Yes.
Okay. And my question was along the lines of Brandon's, that about the mature trees, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
I'm confident, going back to Brandon as well, I remember the neighbors being obviously very concerned about the stormwater management, so it sounds like that's taken care of, but also the screening. So, we're confident that the screening that we have here is acceptable. I guess now that I understand what these little blocks are, okay, kind of fills those in.
Well, I think the little blocks are actually an outline of the disturbed area. But we'll work with the applicant. It's really more of a site plan issue than a subdivision issue.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we're going to go out there and look at what the grading is, where the existing trees are in more detail with the site plan.
Okay. No other questions for me, thank you.
Thanks, I've got a few questions. Just want to first confirm process. So we have a two-step process, we do. One of them has a public hearing, the other does not?
Correct. So on your agenda, the draft agenda for the meeting on the 16th, we will probably either add a draft motion in under the public hearing for this item to have you do the final subdivision action, or under new business.
Under new business, and
Yeah.
I think that's what we've done before.
I think it's been
We've got
done
two
both
lines.
ways, but I think that's the better way to do it.
Yeah. That would be.
So under item 3 on your agenda for next, or 2 weeks from now, we'll have item 3A, which will be the final subdivision.
That would be good. With the subdivision, any waivers or anything out of?
Not aware of any
Tolerance.
waivers at this point, no.
Good.
I think the main question we want to have them answer between now and then is, do they want any subfacing improvement?
I have one more question before you close it down.
Okay, you've got an alibi, go ahead.
Were the public, when they were doing the breakdown as far as if it's a net for the city or a loss for the city, were the public streets factored into that when they were doing that cost analysis for the city? And if they were not public streets, now if they are public streets, does that typically create more of a net gain for them or a net loss for them, for the city?
So as long as the street meets the minimum street standards for VDOT, and they're accepted into the system for perpetual maintenance by the city, then it basically is what we already have as a relationship of expenditures to revenues and such. The fact that the developer is building this public street, that would be a concern if it was a project wherein the city was partnering with the developer and we had an upfront expense of building the street, but that will not be the case. Even though it will become a public street, it's 100% funded by the developer. So it would, after the fact, in terms of the impacts to the city, fiscal impacts.
The maintenance of that, and snow plows. And
It's like any other development in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Not sure you answered the question, but it should be pretty insignificant because the city does get funding for street miles. And
We
this
get
just adds
annual
that.
maintenance funding, right?
Yeah.
So it's a watershed.
Well, that's a good way to put it.
Perfect, thanks.
But you good?
That's it.
I can't remember whether or not there are overhead utilities in that part of North Pleasant Valley.
There are overhead utilities as shows in the images here.
Are they going to remain overhead, or are they going to be? They're going to remain overhead.
We cannot require a private developer to undertake those kind of public improvements that are franchise improvements out in our public right of way.
But in the subdivision, they have to put it underground.
Within the development, all
Yes.
of the utilities will be underground.
Thank you for the follow-up. So the subdivision itself is going to be all.
Right, underground electric, cable, TV, and telephone. There won't be any overhead.
Great. Any other alibis? Then let's move to RZ-22-570, an ordinance to rezone 22.66 acres of land, including 20.88 acres at 231 Crossover Boulevard, 1.62 acres at 2600 South Pleasant Valley Road, and 0.16 acres at 211 Crossover Boulevard, from commercial industrial district with proffers and residential office district with proffers to highway commercial B2 district with planned unit development overlay without proffers. Well, that sounds complicated, so we'll let you explain this.
Thank you, and it is kind of complicated here because we're dealing with a tract of land proposed for rezoning that does not align with existing property boundaries. And so, first couple of slides here, I'm going to try to explain this. So, on the screen there, you see the larger parcel that extends all the way over to the lower right corner there, adjacent to I-81. That is the main area of rezoning. But the portion that comes all the way up to Crossover Boulevard at the frontage there, that will be carved away and reserved for commercial development. So it's that parcel of land there minus that rectangle that would be closest to Crossover Boulevard. The parcel that is immediately to the left of it, right underneath the Crossover Boulevard annotation there, there's a very, very small portion of that parcel that also gets absorbed into this PUD. That's I think it's 211 Crossover Boulevard, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 211. That parcel has a site plan approved for it already for a branch bank. The change there to carve out that easternmost part of that site is not detrimental to that site plan because it's what was intended to be shared private roadway, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then finally, there's that irregular shaped parcel there at the corner of Crossover Boulevard and South Pleasant Valley Road. That's the one that's addressed as 2600 South Pleasant Valley Road. That's where Mission Barbecue and the Pivot PT building is, as well as the TGI Fridays and Chuck E. Cheese restaurants. All of those are on a single parcel of land, and the applicant would like to carve out a 1.62 acre portion of that adjoins the parcel there in the area where, well, let me just go to the next exhibit here. It outlined in green on the left side of the screen, there's that 1.6 acre portion of that property, 2600, that will be carved out. And then toward the top of this image, the orange strip there, that's the little piece of the branch bank parcel that comes into this site. And then just to the right of that, you can see the rectangular portion of the existing Lot 2 that gets carved away and is not part of the rezoning, but instead would remain CM1 zoning. So that's up here along the Crossover Boulevard frontage. Lot 2K, which is the next one to the east of that, that's where we have the Hang 10 car wash proposal, and I'm not sure if I think we brought that to you for admin approval. We may not have, but that's the other new car wash in Winchester.
Can't get enough.
Right. And then beyond that, you can see the larger parcel where CarMax is proposing to develop. So on the existing versus proposed zoning, on the left side here, the property has some salmon-colored R01, residential office zoning, that backs up to the south there, where you see the MR, medium density residential, along Longview Avenue, and some of the other streets there in the Wee Villa subdivision. And that has the little triangles overlaid on it. That means that was conditionally zoned. Then you have some of the blue CM1 that also has the proffers with a little triangle overlay on it, but not all of the property. And that's a result of some property configurations a long time ago. The area got completely re-subdivided when Crossover Boulevard right-of-way was established and some of the frontage parcels were envisioned. So the property that's closest to Crossover Boulevard itself is CM1, commercial industrial, without proffers. And just to confuse things even further,
Please.
going to that exhibit, the little yellow area that's there in the lower, kind of the right center area there, adjacent to the green area, that's a part of the 2600 Pleasant Valley Road property that is in the R01 district instead of the CM1. So as I said, a complicated title of the ordinance because it's a complicated configuration of existing properties. But back to the zoning map on the right side here, this is what the outcome should be if the property is rezoned. So the PUD will have just a 50-foot wide stem actually fronting along Crossover Boulevard in between the branch bank and the portion of the larger tract that's not going to be rezoned PUD there. It'll wrap in behind the Hang Ten Car Wash as well as in behind the CarMax site, and that is all intended to be rezoned to B2. That's the red color that you see there. The diamonds reflect the fact that it would have PUD overlay. So the conditional zoning designation, which is the triangles, gets scaled back to the 2600 Pleasant Valley Road property, with the exception of the 1.6 acre carve out that gets rezoned and assembled in with this PUD property. I probably confused you, but hopefully the pictures give you an idea here. What's outlined in yellow and shown as red with the diamonds, that's the area of the proposed PUD. So that's the 22.66 acre area that's subject to the rezoning.
I'm sorry, I'll hold my question. Questions for the staff? David?
Well, the original map that showed all this land all fronting all the way to Pleasant Valley Road, it's all the same owner, but they're not asking to rezone, but this part of it, is that what you're saying?
Yes, actually, with the exception of the CarMax site, is the branch bank site been sold off? Okay, so the CarMax site and the branch bank and maybe the car wash site. So those three have been sold off. Otherwise, all of the land that you see outlined in red here, that is all under the ownership of Blaze Developments. So that's why they had that flexibility to be shifting the
So it's all
property.
unless the owner, they're only looking to rezone
Correct.
this portion.
Yes, yes.
All right.
And there may be even further subdivision, and I'll get into toward the end of the discussion here, where there may be yet another subdivision proposed. So that's the extent of the rezoning. Mr. Chairman, did you have a comment, question?
No, I'm gonna wait until we go around.
I'm just, for orientation, where is Trex headquarters?
Okay, so Trex is on the north side of Crossover Boulevard. You can see the little named private street, Trex Way. They have everything that's between that private roadway going off the north side of Crossover Boulevard and Interstate 81 that you see there in the lower right corner. That's where they're building their headquarters property. So they will be across from CarMax and across from the Hanks Ten Car Wash.
Is CarMax, is that actually going to be built, or is it, have we heard anything from them?
They have an approved site plan, so they can build, but they made a decision once to hold off, and we thought maybe they weren't going to go through. They subsequently came back with some revisions that we approved administratively, and I think they are intending to move forward. But hard to say.
I don't really have any questions as of now, but I know I'm going to have somewhat of a concern later on in this discussion about what's going to be there and taking up commercial space with residential space. I know because some commercial space was taken up behind Lowe's with the, I think it was mixed use. I think they're doing about 10,000 square feet or so business space plus whatever it was, 400 units or so. I'm just worried about taking up all that commercial space for residential use and losing out on it. That's all.
I'm sorry.
Nothing so far.
I had a similar question. is residential the best use for this land?
Yeah, and I'll proceed with the rest of this in a minute here, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, do you want me to go ahead, or? Okay, so, moving forward then, this was the development plan that we received back at the beginning of July. This was through the July 18th version. This is the one that is in your electronic packet. We will be updating that before the meeting in 2 weeks to reflect the current layout, which is shown here. Still 4 buildings ranging in height from 4 to 5 stories, mainly 4 stories out along the road there that you see along the north side of each of the 4 buildings. That is yet unnamed, although the easternmost part, closest to the 4th building here on the east, is already called Carmax Lane. So the logical extension would be to continue that, but we've asked the applicant whether they are intending to use Carmax Lane or whether there would be some other name. The easternmost axis coming down in front of the westernmost axis that shows there in front of the westernmost of the 4 buildings, that aligns with Leg Boulevard, so it's possible that that would have a Leg Boulevard designation, although this would be a private portion and the rest of Leg Boulevard is all public, so it may actually have a name change occur at Crossover Boulevard. The center one at this point does not have any name, but that would probably be one of the ones that's most heavily utilized because it's in between the 2 larger buildings that are proposed here. So a couple of things that have changed here. They have reconfigured some of the parking that's in behind the building. They have reconfigured some of the parking out along the front. Probably the biggest change that you'll see on this plan versus the one that you had in your packet is on the easternmost part. They have scaled back the dog park and the linear trail to pull that back away from where the floodplain is. And the floodplain is that kind of wavy line that you see that kind of comes up into the area here. So they're basically keeping all of the development outside of that floodplain boundary. And so all of that area that is south of that red line there, backed up to the single-family homes in the Wee Villa subdivision, there won't be any disturbance in that area, and that's mainly because it's very steeply sloped, and it also is the Buffalo Lick Run tributary floodplain, which includes some floodway and some mapped 100-year floodplain. So they've also reconfigured the parking lot a little bit in behind building 3000. That's the U-shaped building that you see there in the middle of the 3 on the screen now. That is the building that will have the indoor amenities and the leasing office as well. And in behind that building, I'll get to a slide that talks about the proposed outdoor amenities, including the saltwater pool and fire pits and things. The other change, as I mentioned, was over here on the eastern side, in behind the corner of Carmax. They're going to have a fenced-in dog park and then an area for children's level field play there that would connect to that trail that extends along the south side of the parking lot and comes over out to that new east-west street there that then connects in with a sidewalk to the easternmost building. So this is 100% rental. It is, at this point, none of the units are identified for affordable dwelling units by the applicant. They are all market rate, 1 and 2 bedroom units with the exception of, I think, just maybe 30 or so 3-bedroom units. There is no commercial component to this PUD. You mentioned the one up behind Lowe's there on Leg Boulevard. That was 18,000 square foot of commercial, but it was 262 units, I think. Compared to this is no commercial and 331 at the most units. They have asked for the ability to provide more garage spaces and fewer units. That might take it down to 328 units, I think, in return for adding about 8 garage spaces. The garages are not out along that front. They instead come in from the sides and from the rear of the buildings, particularly building 4,000, which is the easternmost one, and building 2,000, the L-shaped one there, and then some garage spaces in behind building 1,000, which is the westernmost one there. And in your packet, Carolyn did put into the packet the updated drawing, so what you have in your paper copy is consistent with what we just received today here, the August 2nd version of the development plan, including the other 2 sheets. The project is such a long project in terms of east to west, it didn't really fit on a single page, so the dog park and the playground are actually a match line that continues onto the second page there. Okay, I'm going to move forward just quickly with the architectural plans, and there is a binder. I think I dropped it off with Commissioner Mayfield there. If you're interested in seeing the details on it, these are 4 story buildings as viewed from the street out front, but it's a slope site, so they will have a 5th level that will walk out, or in case of the garages, drive out to the rear parking areas there. And then, so this is building 1,000, the westernmost building, front, rear, and side elevations. If this looks familiar to you in terms of what you saw for the Lake Boulevard, Winchester Commons development, this too is Castle Development. They're the same developer that was doing that project. So these earth tones, there's some similarities in terms of the buildings with what they proposed there. The L-shaped building is known as Building 2,000. Oh, I guess I should back up. So the westernmost building, 1,000, is proposed to have 44 apartment units, a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. Building 2, and this is subject to change, it's approximately 89 units, and this is the building that would come in with parking accessing around the back side, including some spaces that are up close to the back of that building. The architecture, though, is very similar, but at the rear elevation, which is down here, known as the south elevation, you can see there the bank of garage spaces that are being proposed. That would be an add-on to the rent, that if some of the tenants wanted to lease a garage space, they would pay additional rent for that. And you can also see over on the lower right side there, that gray area, that reflects where they would have retaining walls to have it step down to where the basement level is exposed. The biggest building is Building 3,000. This has approximately 114 units. Again, it's kind of subject to change with the actual number depending upon whether they do garage spaces. And this too has the bank of garage spaces on one of the sides, but the rear of the building actually has units down on the lower level, as well as some amenity space, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the middle elevation there, the second one from the top, you can kind of see the gray coming in from each of the sides. That's where they're stepping down from the driveways that come in on the side of the building to that courtyard, and in the foreground, that's where the patio area and the swimming pool would be located. And then finally, the easternmost building is known as 4,000. That's approximately 72 units, depending upon what they do with the parking. And again, you can see a few garage spaces there in the lower left, and some of the retaining wall that would be necessary to kind of transition from having 5 floors exposed to grade versus on the north side only 4 levels. So fairly complicated in terms of the property configuration, and also complicated in terms of the proposed buildings here. In terms of floor plans, I just pulled out for the top 2 are examples of 1-bedroom units, depending upon whether it's in the corner of the L or whether it's just an internal unit otherwise. In the lower left, a 2-bedroom unit, and then finally a floor plan in the lower right for the few number of 3-bedroom units that they're proposing. I mentioned the amenity space, so toward the top you can see a little schematic of Building 3,000. The colored areas correspond with what I have kind of blown up here. So this is in the upper left, the leasing office, some of the back of house operations. Down toward the back, some private and, private fitness and fitness otherwise. I'm not sure what private fitness is. Maybe there's classes or something there that you have to sign up for. And then they also have some co-work and mezzanine and coffee bar spaces, the green area there. And this is actually part of 2 levels. So the other part here is where they have the club room, the bar, entertainment lounge, and restrooms and pool equipment space, because the courtyard that this accesses out to is where the majority of the outdoor amenities are, including I think it's 3,000 square foot surface area, saltwater pool, fire pits, picnic areas. I think there's forget what the term was, some kind of a brewery thing, or it's I forget the terminology. I have it in here under the list of the amenities. Brew garden. So I don't know what a brew garden is. Apparently you grow brew there or something. And then in terms of the outdoor amenities, again, the majority of them are there in that courtyard of building 3,000. On the upper right, that was the original plan to extend the trail out and have the dog park over closer to Interstate 81 in behind the stormwater pond there. But because of that floodplain boundary, they're scaling that back to what you see in the lower right now, where it's a smaller dog park and a smaller proposed open area with picnic tables and active play. The lower left identifies some of those amenities that they're proposing. So they will have a dog park. There's a maintenance building that will have a pet spa, washing station in it, and then the walking trail at the rear of the property. In terms of traffic impacts, this is where we compare the generation of traffic that would arise from the current CM1 zoning, meaning commercial or industrial development, as compared to the 100% conversion to multifamily development. And so there in the chart, the comparison, you can see that the figures for average daily traffic, as well as the weekday evening peak hour and the Saturday peak hour, in all cases the traffic generation for the apartments is lower than what would arise from a expected volume of commercial activity on the property. So that is why we're not looking for them to do improvements. The intersection of Crossover and Lake Boulevard is already fully signalized, so that provides a safe opportunity for the residents of the 331 apartments to come out and make a left turn back toward Pleasant Valley Road. There's also interparcel access through the site at 2600 South Pleasant. That's where you could come in behind Chuck E. Cheese and come out to Pleasant Valley Road there in front of Mission Barbecue. In addition to the 2 other connection points. So in the aerial view, the intersection of Lake and Crossover, that'll serve as the westernmost connection there. And the building that you see over there at the extreme right side there, that's the Chuck E. Cheese restaurant. So it gives you an idea. In behind that, you can kind of see how their parking lot has extensions that would have otherwise tied in with more commercial development. That now will tie in with the parking areas and drives around building 1,000. The one thing related to traffic and circulation that we did mention is kind of represented here on this slide where I have CarMax Lane identified. That's going to be a fairly heavy volume of traffic, people, customers coming in and out, as well as employees to the CarMax site. They do not otherwise have direct access because you're at the abutment where you extend over the interstate on the bridge there. So we've indicated that we would prefer not to see the back out parking that's shown there, but instead do more like what they've done in front of building 3,000 and building 2,000 to have parallel parking along those private streets. They have reduced some of the parking on the updated development plan, but there's still some back out parking there where you come in on toward Thomas Orchard Road from Crossover Boulevard and make that turn onto Carmax Lane to get to the Carmax site. In terms of fiscal impacts, you can see that even the direct impacts result in a 462, almost 463,000 net fiscal benefit to the city on an annual basis in the table 12 at the top. When you factor in the offsite multiplier effects, it gets closer to 610,000 of positive impact annually. They are looking at a very small number of 3-bedroom and no 4-bedroom units, so that is probably the main explanation why the 331, in this case, they actually based it on 336 units. The 26 estimated students is a pretty low number, but again, so many of the units are 1-bedroom units, and it's not expected that they would generate a lot of school-age children. But the question always comes up, have we talked to the superintendent of schools? Every time I go talk to him, he says, give me more students. So these large developments...
We'll probably ask the question in 2 weeks.
I'm sure you will, and there's your answer already. Even without commercial development, this nets out very positively for the city from a fiscal standpoint. That is about it. I'm going to share this last slide, but understand that it is just a concept at this point. We're looking at traffic impacts, fiscal impacts. One thing that we did recognize is that adding another 500 and some students in this part of the 3rd Ward, where we have just Weaver Park down in the southeast part of the city, could create some negative impacts in terms of the capacity of that existing park to serve a pretty significant percentage-wise increase in population. That park serves the Wee Villa subdivision that this immediately adjoins, as well as the Dye subdivision that kind of backs up on the opposite side of Paper Mill Road to the industrial park, where Bridgeforth and Henkel Harris are located there. So the blue area there we've identified as a possible open space dedication if the developer was receptive to it. Talked with Mr. Maslowski about that. His initial indication was that he did not think that the applicant, primarily the landowner, Glaze Development, would be opposed to that. The Castle Development Company does not intend to acquire that because that would be floodplain, and their lender doesn't want them to own floodplain. I think it's the easiest way to put it. So there are some properties in between the park and that possible dedication, and so as part of a larger master planning effort by Parks and Rec and city staff otherwise, there is a possibility that this developer could mitigate some of that negative impact on park facilities by contributing additional land in that area, and possibly the city could talk with some of the other property owners to see if there's a way to at least connect it, the park and the open space via trail easement, if not some acquisition. That's it in terms of the slides. You have a draft favorable motion, draft motion to table. I do want to point out, though, on page 51 of 131 of your packet there, the suggested reason for tabling it, number A there, submittal and review of a management and maintenance document. We didn't actually get a document, but on the second page of the development plan, there is language about the maintenance and management of the project. So I had overlooked that back when drafted the staff report last week. And then there's also a possible motion to recommend denial. I know that there's going to be concerns when this gets to the PED committee and council in the fact that there's no ownership opportunity here. We had suggested to them maybe consider one of the 4 buildings being offered as condominium. The developer, Castle Development, really isn't interested in doing a condominium. They want to own rental properties. And the other thing is that there's no affordable housing identified with it, nor any commercial, although the carve-out of the land there fronting on Crossover Boulevard in some ways could be viewed as the commercial component of this. With that, I'll take any questions.
Before I go around the table, is the, just up to your slide, because it's up here, the blue portion, though, today is part of the rezoning?
It is. It's the green. It's kind of the green area,
Yeah, okay.
minus some of that comes up the hill there beyond the line in terms of the floodplain boundary.
Thank you.
Yes.
So we'll go around again. David?
So I'm getting confused. At one point, I thought you said that the roadway was coming out and aligning with Lake Boulevard?
The westernmost one in the upper left corner of this image, that's the connection. That's a private connection that
Okay.
will align with the signalized Lake Boulevard intersection.
I guess I am curious, as I heard spoken earlier about best use of commercial versus housing, but the other thing just caught my eye is why in the world would you rename it just because it's private? Why? That just seems to lead to confusion. Why wouldn't you keep Lake Boulevard as a name?
We can do that. It gets to be confusing when people complain about potholes in the private portion of roads that otherwise are public streets. And but I agree. I think it would be desirable to just call that southern
It's like
stub
easier
Lake
to
Boulevard.
Explain that and
Yeah.
why they got lost with
Yeah.
the street is the street.
Anything else, David?
That's all I have.
Two things. One is obviously what I said earlier, my concern about the loss of the commercial space, ground for businesses. I get that there's a good bit of land across the street of Crossover Boulevard between Trex and the back way to Home Depot. And yeah, there's a good bit of land around there, but again, I have concern about taking up that space, using that commercial space for residential use. Kind of like to see something where they had it before, right behind Lowe's, where they did like a little mixed use type deal. Less commercial space, more commercial space, or less residential space, more commercial space. And then my second item was about the park, the overload of the park, and trying to maybe acquire other parcels and stuff like that. My question would be is if they can't even keep up with that park and other parks in Winchester, how would they be able to keep up with those parks and that that blue area dedicated to the city of Winchester? That would be my only concern about this suggestion. But besides that, that's pretty much it.
John?
You never mentioned elevators. Are these buildings all have elevators?
They do, multiple elevators, I believe.
And any kind of price range for these? I know you said they're not going to be affordable, but what kind of price range?
I think that is in the
Yes.
memo from Mr. Maslowski, 1,400, I think. it
Start
That's
at
in there, yeah.
14 to 2000.
14 to 2000. And the last thing, who picked the name Carfax for a street?
was. CarMax did.
Don't we have a say, or do you have a say?
It's a private road.
It's a private road, so we usually, unless it conflicts with something that's already there or is a controversial name and stuff, we typically allow the developer to choose the names.
Kind of commits sense build.
Okay, easy to do. I'm saying more like Mark.
Anything else, John? That's it. Paul?
Lots to gesture. One just question is, did the housing study that we have talked about every time this come up, these big projects have come up, did it talk about rentals versus homeownership needs, or I don't recall how that distinction came out.
The overall study said we need more housing, period.
Everything.
And one of the other things that it said that is if we build new quality multifamily, there will be some of the existing aged and run down, I guess. They translate one and the same. There's some very good historic housing, but it will put less, relieve some of that pressure and maybe free up also some of the single-family detached housing that is currently serving a rental market, because the people who do want to rent could move into other multifamily development and free up those houses for owner occupancy.
Understood. So could be a complex web here.
Yeah, it's kind of an indirect way of saying, we have a lot of single-family detached housing that should be meeting the needs of owner occupancy, first home buyers and things, but instead they're getting bought up by investors
They're being crowded
as
out.
rental product.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I don't know how many questions I have. And I guess this is not,
We'll count.
a discussion. Well, they're just more statements.
Start with your first one.
This isn't sitting well with me. I mean, I just am not sure that this is the best use of this land, as Commissioner Piper was saying as well. I feel like the level of density and the fact that there's no affordable units in it makes a certain amount of sense for the properties that it's so adjacent to these big commercial spaces and land use. But I'm concerned that it's going to be a very isolated community, similar to concerns that I think we all expressed when the Lake Boulevard community was being proposed. And I feel like it'll also kind of further isolate the properties that are to the south of it. I do appreciate the thought of creating the floodplain as a parkland, and I can see that there's a lot of potential there with boardwalks and trails and everything, but then also, Commissioner Piper, we're on the same page very much today. I'm concerned about the upkeep of that and the burden that it could be upon the city while it's also this asset. I do think that this project should have some connection, at the very least, to Weaver Park, or broadly to that neighborhood to the south, and that just to help it not feel like it's its own little bubble. I'm disappointed that there's not affordable housing integrated into these properties, because why not? And I'm also, for some reason, because this is not usually something that I am concerned about, I'm concerned about the level of density. What is the possible number of units that they could have were they to meet all their density factors versus what it is that they will have?
It is a lot higher than what they actually did come out with, because they have that unbuildable land.
Right, okay.
That's a large site, about 250 to 300 foot of the southernmost,
Right.
which
Well,
is
that would
basically
meet
all
their
of
green
the
space
current
requirement.
R1. And when that property was conditionally zoned many years ago, they had asked for CM1 zoning of that, and city staff and council ultimately agreed to only rezone it to R1 instead of CM1, because they wanted to have a buffer between the commercial industrial property and the single family medium density residential. But this project is coming out at a density of 24 units per acre. We
Okay.
have 331 units on 22.67 acres or so. So it's, that compares to 32 units per acre for the local. They're up behind Tropical Smoothie. And it's comparable to, I think, the Fairmont one that you just saw back in June. I think that's around in the 24 to 26 range as well.
Okay.
So from a standpoint of gross acreage, it's not one of the more dense ones, but in terms of those buildings, those are, most of the other products have been 3-story
Right.
developments, maybe 4-story. These are all 4 full levels plus partial lower level, 5th level.
Okay, those are my statements.
I know I'll have more questions in 2 weeks. It's interesting that you say that you feel like they would be isolated. I don't feel that at all. I think it's an interesting place to put residential. I don't know if I love it or not yet, but there's neighborhoods behind it. It's easy access right there to Pleasant Valley, all the shopping, easy access over to Costco and 522. So I think it's a very interesting place. Again, not sure if I love it or not. And so I don't think I have any questions. I think I do need to read through it and kind of.
Yeah, I did want to mention one thing in that regard. We don't really talk about land use in Frederick County, but on the other side of the interstate where that roundabout is, that adjoining area there, they are proposing some very high density and a lot of multifamily development there. I can't remember. It used to be the Russell 150. I forget what it's called now.
And right over there on 522, they're building a bunch of stuff. Right when you get off.
Yeah,
of
the Madison
522.
Terrace apartment
So
development
it's-
is over there, so there will be more. And I in the staff report, I did mention that these units would easily be, I think, about 0.2 of a mile away from some grocery there at the Walmart, and a little further away to Target.
Martin's.
Not as close as the Winchester Commons one that's on the upper part of Lake Boulevard.
A few comments. First of all, I think you raised a good issue about commercial or housing, and I think I don't think we've had very many discussions over the last few years on that particular aspect of land use. But my sensing is that we've not had very many we've not had that much demand for commercial activities.
We have not.
But on the housing side, we've had great demand for housing. And the housing study says that demand is going to continue. I think that's true.
Yeah, and in some regards, we're kind of in a period where we want to protect the existing commercial development that we have. In other communities, you see big box developments and restaurants, both fast food and sit-down quality restaurants. They're closing down. We haven't seen that in Winchester to any large degree, and so the way we can help preclude that from happening is by bolstering the concentration of residential population that will utilize that existing commercial development.
And back to a discussion you and I had a few weeks ago, Winchester is locked in 9.3 square miles, and just the nature of things, we are going to get taller and tighter. I mean, that's the only, that is the path forward. I'm sorry I came up with that after we finished the comprehensive plan, but I think that is our path, whether we're comfortable with that or not, and it's grow or die. But the next level of issue is owned homes or rental homes, and I think we have very little control over that as a city government has very little control over that.
We do. I mean, council has full discretion. Since this is a rezoning action, council can just say it's not consistent with our housing goals. Unlike a subdivision, like the townhouse subdivision you just saw, council can't say, oh, well, we wish these were single-family houses, so we're going to deny the townhouses. But rezonings are discretionary.
I do agree with other commissioners about the affordable housing, piece of it would be helpful. Really not. General audience is really the developer. So think long and hard on that, but taller and tighter. Briefing is really in 2 pieces, and I think the rezoning, if we could maybe make that, even though I think we're all trying to still absorb it, maybe a little simpler. I think maybe if we just use the final slide you used on the rezoning,
The very last one, that one?
The what's on page 59 of 131.
The updated one then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will delete this one, which was the version that went out to you
Okay.
earlier. We just received this one. I literally just got this one popped in the presentation a little before noon today, so.
Thank you. Did you talk about density bonus at all? Did I miss that?
I don't think they're making use of any density bonuses because, well, actually, I take that back. It's the 16 unit base. Ron, do you want to address the density bonuses that you're making?
Well, right now we have 331 units max on 22 acres, which is 15 units per acre. So we're under the 16 unit minimum. We have elevators to all the units, which is worth, I don't know, 10%. We have, I don't know if we meet the amenity space.
But you're not using that.
Right.
That kind of gets to your density question. Thank you.
It's just such a big site.
I was initially confused by the road network, but I think it's clearer now. I think. And just to confirm, 61.4% green space. That's
Yeah, it's a large green area that's associated with this.
obviously the flood zone area, and I think it's actually positioned on that piece of land kind of cleverly. Nevertheless, we need to think about affordable housing because that's, a lot of folks live in West Virginia and they really ought to have the opportunity to live in Winchester and work here. Any other alibis on this? John, please.
My question was, have they considered, is this going to be phased in construction? They've reached that point to talk about?
I mean, they may open some buildings one at a time, but I don't, but right now that's not part of the plan.
Okay.
They'll just build it all out.
But we'd have a better handle on that once the site plan was set.
Yeah, okay. I just wonder if they talked about it yet.
I want to correct a
Please.
statement that I made earlier because you kind of caught me off guard with the density bonus, and I was like, what are they? I was reading you the density for the townhouse project up on North Loudon Street. That one is at 24 units per acre. Ron is correct that this one is actually below the 16 unit base density. It's at 14.6, and that's in the density paragraph there on page 50 of your packet there. So they're not even exceeding the 16 unit per acre site density. Sorry about that.
Taller and tighter.
The other thing is they originally were proposing 343 units, and they have now come down to between 328 and 331 units. So we're going to be updating the density calculations as this moves forward.
Now, in terms of process, in 2 weeks, is Ron going to sit at the table and brief part of this? Okay.
But most of that, let me clarify, most of that is already in this
Yeah.
this updated version that you just got today.
Any other questions?
I just want to make a statement, I'm not against the park area, just maintaining it is my biggest concern
Right.
of that option.
Well, I think you're right, and if we, yeah, well, I'll say that again. I think you are right. But our purview as the planning commission is probably the land use piece that says, yes, a park would be appropriate. How the city manages and maintains it, that's not really in our purview. Is that fair, Ms. Humans?
It's fair. I'll share with you that Patrick Elwell and I met with the Parks and Rec director and with representatives from the Public Services Department, including Mr. Eisenhock, and learned that there already is a park improvement plan in the works for Weaver Park. So they are aware that it needs attention, and in terms of programming some activities there. The other thing to keep in mind is that, again, from a fiscal impact, the city's got a net increase of over $609,000 a year, hopefully some of that can go toward improving the Parks and Rec and infrastructure.
That's the hope.
But I think it's right for us to consider parks and recs in terms of land use.
Can I clarify one thing? We're, the developer's more than happy to keep this property as part of the development, and we would only provide it to the city if the city wants it.
Right.
So we are not asking the city to take this thing.
Right. No, that's a fair clarification, and I would have, I'm not gonna make any assumptions. If you were to give that to the city, what happens to their green space calculations?
Yeah, and that is a very good question. We're already taking that into account. There are some stormwater management improvements within that area. A sand filter that we have already said, if we were to accept a donation of the land, we would not be accepting the maintenance responsibility for that stormwater management component. But beyond that, we would be looking at the density, the open space calculations, and we would probably credit them with the open space, regardless of whether it remains private or whether it has the added benefit of being available to all the residents.
And that sounds reasonable. I know the city's done that before. I just
Yeah.
wanted to say it out loud.
Yep.
Moving from there to committee reports, did anyone attend a county meeting?
They, oh, you did? Oh, they canceled it in the beginning of July, but I guess they don't.
Last, in July, I went to the last one. The only issue came up was chickens in the backyard. If you own a house with 1 acre of land, you can have 6 chickens now in a county, with all kinds of restrictions. That was the only thing they talked about.
They moved that to Board of Supervisors to approve.
Yes, they did, yeah.
How exciting. We'll probably get pressure again to see that here.
No, I was just gonna say the one in the beginning of July was canceled, so I didn't miss on that one.
And I think their most recent one is
This week, tomorrow's work session, so. no.
just a work session, right?
Projects pending council approval?
Just two, the Fairmont, 550 Fairmont PUD rezoning that is going forward for a public hearing on August 9th. Went through a PED committee and through a first reading. Still a lot of interest from the adjoining property owners, but I think the majority of councilors seem comfortable with the project. And then the other one is the Commerce Street PUD rezoning, which did get received favorably from PED, but during the first reading, there were some of the councilors that expressed concerns about that project being all multifamily and not having any affordable housing component. So that's kind of the pretext for what I've shared with you about the Crossover Boulevard. We're hearing more frequently and more of the council members expressing that concern.
And I digress just a little bit to the Fairmont project. I recall vividly the illustration, the graphics they showed us, Fairmont Avenue, very nice. And then I drove there the other day and realized that the overhead utilities are a jungle.
They all go down.
Given what you just said about this project, are they going to stay overhead or are they going to be invisible like they are in the illustrations?
They have indicated that they voluntarily are going to absorb the cost of putting those underground.
Happy day, and I'm glad that
Rural Farms did the same thing out on
Yeah.
Berryville Avenue. We could not have required them to do so, but they did it.
that's good. I'm going to sleep better knowing that now every time I drive down Fairmont. Any general discussions? Any questions, comments? Mr. Humans, any announcements?
You all have your hard copy version of the comprehensive plan. I'd like to say that that's probably the last version that Planning Director Humans will ever be involved with. Hopefully you can be proud of what you've accomplished there. It was challenging times trying to put together a plan update during COVID, but it's done.
We did it.
And the probably the most important thing I'll point out is the pulled out character map in the appendix at the back. That required a lot of finessing to try to get a clear clear enough version of that, clean enough version of that. So I want to thank our IT staff, particularly Kyle Schweizer, for making that happen for us. And then I want to see if Alfredo wants to come up and give you a heads up about something that may be on your agenda for 2 weeks from now.
Well, should we look at it today if it's going to be on the agenda in 2 weeks?
We don't have it with us, but we can give you a teaser, I think.
Yes. Yeah, so if you all recall the Links project on North Cameron and East Fairfax, their site plan is under review, and in the siting of their, I guess you'd say, their refuse container room for the entire facility, they have finally found a location on site. However, the location that they've cited is going to be within the main structure.
This is the Cameron Square.
This is the Cameron Square. Large, massive project there. So with that, they're going to have a large overhead door facing a public right-of-way. And per the zoning ordinance, anytime that's going to happen, that's a no. And so in situations where the applicant has made every reasonable effort to site it on the very limited site, being that their structure takes pretty much a large portion of the site, staff has chosen to consult, or as required by zoning, to consult the planning commission on the location of that overhead door for the receptacle for the refuse. So with that, we'll get that from the applicant and forward it to you all before the regular meeting, review through consultation.
And I'm sure we'll have questions about what other options they've explored.
And just to clarify, this is a decision of the zoning administrator, but it requires consultation with the commission, not a vote by the commission. So this is kind of a opportunity for you to provide Alfredo with your thoughts about it, but the decision on the waiver really rests with him as the zoning administrator. And there are provisions in there that he can provide you between now and 2 weeks from now in terms of efforts they've made to try to mitigate the visual impacts, including some screening out along Cameron, and they're already responding to that in some regard.
That would be good. Why is this one different than I recall the car wash at the Royal Farms? I thought we had a chop on that. Is that because that was a site plan, or?
Well, at
why is that?
Carfax, you were approving the site plan also.
Okay.
And so we're not actually at the stat. I don't think the Cameron Square conditional use was approved, but I don't think the site plan has been finalized yet. This is one of those last things to finalize before we bring the site plan to you for authorizing administrative approval or otherwise conducting a public hearing on it. But in that case, you recall, where the car wash was, they provided some evergreen trees in front of it. Kind of hard to do in this case, but Alfredo will go through those details.
So after he could possibly approve this, then we get to see the whole site plan?
Yeah, for authorizing
Okay.
administrative approval, if that's your inclination.
Yeah. Just trying to figure out where we are in the...
Yeah, we're kind of in the pre-site plan approval process.
Yeah, just having a discussion with us and getting our individual feedback. I'm not sure if that means anything. Consultations, I mean, I don't...
I hear you.
Okay. Thank you.
Just quoting what the
what the
ordinance
zoning
says.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Anything else on your docket?
I think that's it.
Any alibis or questions or issues? We're adjourned.
Thank you.
You like the bullet?